Highway 666, located in the American Southwest, is a stretch of road that has become infamous for its eerie reputation and dark history. Spanning across several states, including New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, and Utah, this highway earned its sinister nickname due to the inclusion of the number 6666 in its official designation. The number itself is often associated with the number of the beast from the Bible's Book of Revelation, which refers to the Antichrist and has long been connected to supernatural and malevolent forces. The fact that a stretch of road was officially named after this controversial number contributed to its haunting reputation. The highway's reputation as a place of supernatural phenomena wasn't only due to the number 666, however. The region in which it passes through is vast, desolate, and sparsely populated. It winds its way through rugged and remote areas, often devoid of any nearby towns, offering very little in the way of human presence. This isolation alone gives the highway a sense of vulnerability, where travelers, especially those journeying at night, could easily become the subjects of strange occurrences without any witnesses around. For many years, people who drove along this highway reported feeling unnerved, even before any ghostly encounters occurred. Travelers often described the highway as having an oppressive feeling, with some even claiming to have felt a deep, inexplicable dread simply being there. This sense of unease, combined with the lack of any bustling human activity nearby, led to the highway becoming a place of myth and legend. Many local residents and long-distance travelers alike would recount strange experiences, such as inexplicable lights, eerie sounds, and fleeting shadows that would dart across the road, suggesting the presence of something unseen. The highway's geographical location further added to its chilling atmosphere, stretching through areas with long histories of Native American significance. Some believe the land on which Highway 666 was built was never meant to be disturbed. Many Native American tribes that inhabited the region were said to have placed curses on certain parts of the land, believing the spirits of the earth would punish anyone who dared to travel too far into sacred territory. This historical context adds an additional layer of complexity to the paranormal claims surrounding Highway 666. Some theories even suggest that the spirits of these ancient lands may still be present, lingering and watching over the road, waiting for the unwary. As the legend grew, so did the number of reported paranormal events. The strange happenings were not just limited to ghostly apparitions or unsettling sounds. Many drivers reported seeing inexplicable phenomena, such as eerie fogs that seemed to appear out of nowhere, strange lights floating over the horizon, and vehicles breaking down for no reason, as if the road itself was holding some sinister power over the travelers. Due to the association with the number 666 and the increasing number of strange occurrences and sightings, Highway 66 gained national attention. Eventually, the highway was officially renamed U.S. Route 491 in 2003, as local authorities saw its dark legacy. However, the history and legends surrounding Highway 666 remain deeply ingrained in the minds of those who have heard the tales. The renaming of the highway didn't remove the paranormal association. If anything, it added to the lore, as if the spirits of Highway 666 were angry at being erased from the landscape. Despite its new name, the road continues to be regarded as a place where supernatural forces might be lurking, waiting to interact with those who venture into its eerie expanse. Travelers continue to report strange experiences, ensuring that the haunting legacy of Highway 666, now U.S. Route 491, will live on for generations to come. Jack, the trucker in this story, is an experienced driver who has spent countless hours on the road. Like many truckers, he is used to the solitude of the long haul, the quiet hum of the engine, and the rhythmic passing of the miles. However, on this particular night, he's traveling along Highway 666, a road notorious for its eerie reputation. Jack had heard the rumors about the highway, but he wasn't particularly superstitious. He had driven on isolated stretches of road for years without incident, and he was used to the strange feeling of loneliness that often accompanies night driving. As he made his way along the dark, empty road, the silence around him was almost oppressive. The vastness of the desert stretched out on either side, with little to no sign of life for miles. The only company he had was the occasional sound of wind hitting the truck and the rhythmic thumping of tires against the road. While driving long stretches like this, it's easy to get lost in your thoughts or become mesmerized by the monotonous nature of the journey. But Jack knew that highway driving could be dangerous. Anything could happen when you least expected it. That was why he stayed vigilant, alert to the possibility of wildlife crossing the road or other unexpected events that could catch him off guard. On this particular night, Jack was nearing a particularly desolate stretch of the highway, a place he had driven through many times. But tonight something felt different. The air felt heavier, and there was a strange sense of unease creeping into his mind. He had heard stories from other drivers about Highway 666, but he had always dismissed them as superstitions. Still, the feeling of being watched, of something lurking just beyond the horizon, made him uneasy. Little did Jack know that his night would soon take a turn into the realm of the supernatural. As he continued down the road, he saw a figure in the distance, standing by the side of the highway. At first, he thought it might be a hitchhiker, something he had seen countless times before. But as he got closer, he realized that the figure was unusual. It was a woman, dressed in a long, tattered white gown, standing alone in the middle of the highway at such a late hour. There was no car in sight, no other sign of life. Jack felt an involuntary shiver run down his spine as he approached. It's important to understand the psychology of a trucker in this situation. Long-haul drivers are often isolated for extended periods, and their mental state can become sharp and heightened when faced with the unusual. Jack's initial instinct was to keep driving, to avoid the stranger and move on. But as he got closer, something inside him told him to stop. Perhaps it was his compassion, perhaps a sense of moral responsibility, or simply the human instinct to help another in need. As Jack slowed the truck and pulled up alongside the woman, he wasn't sure what to expect. He rolled down his window, asking if she needed help, and she calmly asked for a ride to the next town. Her voice was soft, almost hauntingly calm, but there was something oddly detached about it. Jack hesitated, scanning her appearance again. She was barefoot, her feet caked in dirt, and her gown was ragged as if she had been walking for miles. She seemed exhausted, but there was something unsettling about her presence. Still, Jack's empathy overpowered his hesitation. This moment is crucial because it represents the classic dilemma faced by those who encounter the supernatural. The decision to engage with the unknown, to extend a hand of kindness, often leads people down paths they never expected to tread. Jack, in this instance, did just that. He let the woman into his truck, unaware that he was about to cross a threshold into an otherworldly encounter. When Jack offered the woman a ride, he could not have known the significance of her appearance. The woman was dressed in a long, tattered white gown, an outfit that immediately set her apart from a typical traveler. Her appearance suggested that she had been walking for a long time. Her bare feet were dirt-streaked and worn, which only heightened the mystery of her presence. There was no sign of a vehicle nearby, no indication of where she had come from or how she had arrived on that stretch of road in the first place. In folklore and paranormal accounts, the appearance of a woman in a white gown is often associated with a ghostly apparition or spirit. This attire is frequently linked to tragic figures, women who died in accidents or under mysterious circumstances. The gown symbolizes purity or innocence, but in the context of a paranormal encounter, it often evokes an eerie, tragic quality. as if the person wearing it is trapped in a moment of time or a specific memory. Jack noticed that despite her disheveled appearance, there was a strange tranquility about the woman. She did not seem frantic or desperate, but instead appeared calm and detached, as if she was simply going through the motions of asking for a ride. She climbed into the truck with an almost unnatural grace, as if she were weightless, and settled into the passenger seat without so much as a word. Jack, still somewhat unsettled by the situation, didn't press her with questions. He began driving, and the quiet tension between them hung in the air like a thick fog. What stood out most to Jack was how the woman carried herself. She wasn't the type of hitchhiker one might expect. She didn't engage in small talk, nor did she offer any explanation for her predicament. She simply sat there, staring straight ahead, as if her mind was elsewhere. This eerie calmness, combined with the unusual setting, made Jack feel increasingly uncomfortable, but still, he couldn't place exactly what was wrong. It was as if something about the situation wasn't adding up, but he couldn't put his finger on it. The absence of conversation between them was the first sign that something was off. In most hitchhiking encounters, drivers and passengers usually engage in small talk, discussing where they're going, why they're traveling, or simply passing the time. But this woman remained silent, offering nothing more than a faint, almost imperceptible breath of air. This silence was uncomfortable, even more so than if she had been speaking. Jack, accustomed to the chatter and camaraderie that comes with sharing a long drive, could not shake the unsettling feeling that something more sinister was at play. As they drove further into the night, the air inside the truck grew heavier. Jack, despite his best efforts, couldn't shake the feeling that the woman was not entirely real. Her stillness, her unnerving quietness, and her ghostly appearance seemed to blur the lines between the living and the dead. As Jack slowed down the truck to offer the mysterious woman a ride, an inexplicable tension seemed to fill the air. The sound of the truck's engine, the constant hum of tires against the asphalt, suddenly seemed distant, almost drowned out by the eerie silence of the road. Jack could feel his pulse quicken as the headlights illuminated the woman in her tattered white gown, making her appear more ethereal, almost as if she didn't belong to this world at all. The question that crossed Jack's mind in that moment was the same that might have crossed anyone else's. Should I stop? Every instinct told him to keep driving. After all, the late hour, the isolation, and the chilling atmosphere were all warning signs. But there was something about the woman that made him pause. The way she stood there, still and unmoving, as if she had been waiting for him specifically, compelled him to slow down and stop the truck. He had seen his share of strange occurrences on the road, but nothing like this. He'd never encountered anyone this late at night, in such a remote part of the highway. And yet there she was, standing alone in the vast emptiness of the desert night. When Jack rolled down his window to speak, the wind carried a slight chill, as if the very air around him had changed. The woman's voice was quiet but clear, almost soft, like a gentle whisper carried on the breeze. "Can you give me a ride to the next town?" she asked, her tone almost imploring, yet without urgency. It wasn't the frantic plea of someone stranded. No, it was something far colder, something that unsettled Jack deeply. Jack hesitated. Something about her eyes, dark, empty, and distant, sent a shiver down his spine. But still, he couldn't help but feel sympathy. The woman looked as though she had been walking for miles, and she didn't seem dangerous, just lost. He told himself she was likely a traveler in need, someone who had ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time. This kind of thing happened on the road. "Sure, I can take you," he replied, though the words left his mouth with less conviction than he had hoped. Something in the back of his mind was telling him to drive on, to avoid getting involved. But that voice was quickly drowned out by the other part of him that simply wanted to help. The woman climbed into the truck without a word. She moved slowly, deliberately, like someone who had all the time in the world. Her movements were unnervingly smooth, almost as if she was gliding into the seat rather than stepping in. Jack tried to shake off the growing unease in his chest and put his foot on the gas pedal. As the truck began to move, the desert landscape stretched out in every direction, an endless stretch of darkness and isolation. The only sound was the low growl of the engine and the occasional hum of the tires against the asphalt. But as they drove deeper into the night, an almost suffocating silence descended between them. Jack glanced over at the woman, expecting to make small talk. He had picked up hitchhikers before, and the ride was usually filled with idle conversation. But she sat there motionless, staring ahead, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her gaze was unwavering, as if she wasn't even aware of the road stretching before them. It was as if her presence was an apparition, more ghost than living being. Jack, now growing uncomfortable with the stillness, tried to break the silence. "Where are you headed?" he asked, his voice sounding louder than usual in the quiet truck cab. The woman didn't respond immediately. For a few moments there was no change, no shift in her posture, no acknowledgement of his words. Jack glanced nervously at the rearview mirror, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter. But the truck continued to move smoothly down the empty highway, and the silence seemed to stretch on, thickening the atmosphere, making it feel even more unnatural. Then, just when Jack was about to ask again, the woman's voice broke through the quiet, so softly it was almost a whisper. "I'm going home," she said. Jack's heart skipped a beat. The words hung in the air, a chill creeping down his spine. Home? She had said it without emotion, almost too casually, yet her tone carried a finality that didn't match her tranquil, almost otherworldly presence. Jack turned his head slightly, trying to catch a glimpse of her face, but her expression was unreadable, her eyes fixed straight ahead. He could feel the tension building in the cab of the truck, the air heavy, pressing in on him. Something wasn't right. The road ahead seemed to stretch forever, an endless ribbon of darkness and silence. The weight of the quiet was crushing, and for the first time in his long career as a trucker, Jack wished he wasn't alone on this stretch of highway. The tension wasn't just psychological, it was palpable, as though the very fabric of the night had shifted with the woman's presence. She didn't belong here. And yet, she sat next to him as though she were simply another passenger on an ordinary journey. Jack's thoughts began to race. Who was this woman? Why was she out here alone at this time of night? And the most chilling thought of all, why did it feel like she was waiting for him? The silence in the truck cabin felt like a weight pressing down on Jack's chest. The hum of the engine, once a comforting sound, now only accentuated the quietness that surrounded him. The woman's presence, though motionless, seemed to loom over him. Every few minutes Jack would glance at her, but she never shifted in her seat or looked at him. She remained still, almost unnervingly so, like a mannequin frozen in time. Jack's hands tightened on the steering wheel as his mind raced. He could feel the unease building within him, the kind of feeling you get when you know something's wrong, but can't quite put your finger on it. Every instinct told him to ask her more questions, to figure out who she was, where she was from, and why she was standing out there on such an isolated highway at this late hour. But when he looked at her face, it was as if she were a stranger from another world, someone who didn't belong in the reality he knew. He swallowed hard and tried to shake off the dread creeping up his spine. "Are you okay?" he asked, breaking the silence once again. No response. Jack furrowed his brow, his mind beginning to race with possibilities. Was she in shock? Had something happened to her? Where was she from? He wondered how much longer he could take the silence. It felt suffocating, as though she was slowly draining the air from the cab with her eerie stillness. His eyes kept darting back and forth between the road and the woman beside him. Every time he looked at her, there was something different in her expression, something subtly off that he couldn't quite describe. It was as if she was aware of his every move, watching him with an intense. Suddenly, the air in the truck seemed to cool, even though the desert heat should have been lingering. It wasn't just the temperature. It felt like something in the very atmosphere had shifted. The space between him and the woman had grown, impossibly tense, as if she were drawing closer even though she hadn't moved an inch. A flash of something in the rearview mirror caught Jack's attention, but when he looked back, he saw nothing. He couldn't shake the thought that he wasn't alone. Not entirely. The quiet in the truck, the way the woman refused to speak or engage, it wasn't natural. It was as if the road itself had become an extension of the ghostly silence. Jack's unease grew to an unbearable level. His foot hovered over the brake pedal, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Something inside him told him that if he stopped now, if he let the truck come to a halt, something would happen. He couldn't bear the thought of what might happen if he let his guard down. Then, out of nowhere, a thought struck him. What if she isn't real? It was a fleeting thought, one that seemed absurd at first, but it began to take root in his mind. The idea grew stronger and more disturbing by the second. Was the woman a figment of his imagination? Or something far darker? Jack's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't dare to look at her again. He couldn't. The thought of her being some kind of spectral being, a lost soul or something far worse, made his stomach turn. But still he couldn't resist the urge to turn his head for one final glance. When he did, he noticed something unsettling. The woman's eyes were now open. They had been closed before, but now they were wide open, staring at him. The intensity in her gaze was paralyzing. Jack felt his throat tighten as if he had forgotten how to breathe. For a moment, he wondered if she had been staring at him the whole time, or if she had just opened her eyes. It was as though time itself had shifted. In that split second, the air around him thickened and his surroundings seemed to blur. The headlights of his truck barely cut through the dark desert landscape, and the road seemed to stretch on forever. Jack's hands trembled as he gripped the wheel. Before he could process what was happening, the woman spoke again, her voice chilling and hollow. "I've been waiting," she said softly. Jack's blood ran cold. Waiting for what? As the words left her mouth, something in the truck seemed to shift, an oppressive, suffocating force that made Jack's chest tighten with fear. What did she mean by waiting? And why did her voice sound like it had come from a place far beyond time? The truck's headlights suddenly flickered, as if responding to the woman's words. Then, in the blink of an eye, the woman's presence seemed to vanish. One moment she was sitting beside him, and the next, she was gone. Jack slammed on the brakes, his heart racing as he jerked the truck to a halt. He spun around in his seat, his breath catching in his throat. There was no sign of her, no trace. Just the empty seat beside him. The truck's engine roared in the silence of the desert. Jack's mind reeled. Had he imagined it? Was he going crazy? But as he looked around, it was clear that she had been there. He could still feel her presence, the oppressive weight of her gaze. He threw open the door and stepped out onto the road, his boots crunching in the sand. The desert night was vast and empty, just as it had been before. There was no woman, no trace of her anywhere. The highway stretched endlessly before him, just like it always had. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, and a cold sweat broke out across his forehead. He scanned the horizon for miles, but there was no sign of life. Nothing but the dark, empty expanse of the highway. Frantic, Jack searched the area. His mind was racing. Was it a dream? Had he imagined the whole thing? But the eerie silence, the sense of dread that lingered in the truck, told him otherwise. He couldn't explain it. There was no logical reason for the woman to have vanished. There was no reason for her to be there in the first place. But the fear, the dread, and the strange sense of inevitability in the air couldn't be shaken. Jack jumped back into the truck, slamming the door behind him. He revved the engine, desperate to escape the emptiness, the lingering presence of the woman. Later, Jack learned from locals that the woman he had encountered was believed to be a ghost, the spirit of a young woman who had died years ago in a tragic accident on Highway 666. According to the stories, she had been waiting for someone to take her home, unable to find peace until she did. The woman in the white gown was a spectral presence, doomed to wander the highway for eternity. Even though the highway was renamed U.S. Route 491, the legend of the ghostly hitchhiker continues. The woman's spirit is said to appear on the same stretch of road, asking for rides before vanishing without a trace. For those brave, or foolish, enough to drive alone along the highway at night, the fear of encountering her haunts every journey.